All right, now that I said that, we're good. So 2 copies that are blank, 1 answer key. The answer key, if you do multiple choice, you can just do like the answer. You don't have to retype the whole question. It can be a single sheet, like 1A, 2B, 3C. It doesn't have to be that.
See, I would have just made 3 copies and just circled it.
Yeah, then you could do that too. If you do multiple choice and you want to do 3 copies and just highlight the correct answer, also fair game. The postulates for natural selection, the things that are absolutely necessary. Variation within a species, as in one cactus that doesn't have thorns and a cactus that has thorns. Right? The variation must be heritable. In other words, it has to be able to be passed on from parent to offspring. That variation must improve fitness, or affect fitness, not necessarily improve, I suppose, because if you were the thornless cactus, your fitness was not helped. I'm looking for overall meaning, not direct words.
Like, no,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I put, like, well, since, like, the environment kind of changed.
So a change in the environment would imply that the deer would have to be a selective pressure, an addition of an animal that would change the environment for that cactus. My assumption is you all answered the question based on the cactus being the one doing the changing. At least what I've read so far, that's what I've seen. Those are our postulates that we listed together when we first talked about how Charles Darwin laid out his theory. Then you saw them again in your packet, bolded in lists in there for you. Usually bold means important, right? So. All right. Mm-hmm.
I said the fittest reproduce. That,
So the 9th question where it says, what do you suppose people mean by survival of the fittest? That's when we talked about how that's often misunderstood. People usually take that to mean, I think one of you said something along the lines of fastest, smartest, strongest, cleverest. Those are the ones people assume are going to survive. And it's not always your ists that survive. It's whoever's better suited to the environment.
Wait, so what, like, say, what if you put, like, it's that person's fitness instead of fit?
I have to know what that means.
Like, fitness, like, your ability to adapt to your environment.
Does an individual ever adapt?
No.
An individual does what? An individual's job is to survive.
And reproduce.
Yep. So you've got to be very, very careful with that vocabulary.
So let's say we like completely bomb this population.
You're going to be okay.
Okay.
What if you put like fitness means like 6 weeks survival?
If that's what you answered for part B, then I would be thrilled. If that's how you chose to explain it to the general public, like you should understand it that way, then you are correct. Don't stress about it. Like don't. This
So
shouldn't be big and scary.
So it doesn't have to be like word for word. It's like around the general language.
I'm looking for the idea. It's the idea, not necessarily
Exactly.
verbatim, because nobody ever remembers anything verbatim, right?
No. Like I remembered a couple of them. Like the bottom two were like really easy, but the chart I kind of forgot a little bit, so that's where I got stuck.
I'm going to read through it. Biggest problem I saw so far, just looking at them, is listing the same thing in 2 different boxes, like what you put in both of them mean the same thing. But again,
Sorry, Scott.
so far right now all I'm doing is grading with circles, underlines, and checks, and then I'll go back through and see where circles, underlines, and checks get us. That's in my head how this all works. So yesterday we went through fossil evidence, right?
Yeah.
What we didn't talk about was how fossils were made, because I didn't tell you guys how Charles Darwin's compatriots understood fossils. So I want to make sure I go back and do that, because that's a glaring error in my explanation. So you have an animal.
The rat.
And it dies. Step one in making a fossil, right? And when I asked for an explanation of how this, because I was told yesterday, you guys have totally done the geology, paleontology thing, like, ad nauseum in grade school. I take it some of you did not.
Wait, did you say it was a B schedule today?
A.
Okay.
Uh, So what they told me was you have a living thing, it dies, it gets covered by rocks, and thus covered by more rocks, and then years later we go back and dig it up. A little bit more happens than that, but you are correct if you say you have a living thing and then it dies. Replacing an eyeball with an X is the universal symbol for die, right? Then all the squishy bits deteriorate, right? It decays. All that other stuff on the outside that doesn't get fossilized, skin, muscles, or skins and muscles, they all deteriorate. They get ripped off by other predators or scavengers or whatever it is. It goes necrotic and bacteria come in, tear it apart, are detritivores and decomposers, right? And then the soft minerals, like calcium, are replaced by hard minerals, like silica. That hardens the skeleton and makes it essentially stone-like. Then it gets covered over by layers and layers and layers of silt. And then that becomes rock, and we can go back and dig it out with our truly tiny chisels and little brushes. Not everything that dies fossilizes. It's not a fossil for every single thing that ever existed. Conditions have to be right. It's just like mummies, right? There's not a mummy for every living thing that ever died. That's because for mummification to happen, it has to be dry, arid, and drafty. Other side, decomposition, necrosis, has to be wet. So that's how you end up with two different fates for when things die. So we don't always get fossils. So Charles Darwin, everybody in Darwin's time understood that this is how fossils were made. Like they got it, they were okay with that. So then when they went back to the fossil record, they could see that things changed over millions and millions and millions of years because they had a fossil record they could interpret. But they also recognized that there were holes in the fossil record because not everything fossilizes. Sometimes you're missing things from the fossil record. And you're always missing plants from the fossil records because plants don't really have a lot of soft mineral to replace with silica. So instead of having a plant fossil, we have impressions of the plants, which is kind of cool. It's like when you take your hand and you put it in wet cement and then pull it out, you have a handprint left. Your hand isn't there. Your hand didn't get fossilized, but the impression of your hand did, so we know what it looks like. Same thing happened with plants. Plants would leave a stem or leaf or something else in soft sediment. That would get covered over, and then we have an impression of a plant. Differences.
So are fossil bones like really hard?
Well, yes, they're hard, but they're also brittle. This is confusing, right? Like hard and brittle seem like opposites. So usually when I have students think about that, I challenge you to think about peanut brittle, which is one, disgusting, and Well, I take it you like peanut brittle. More for you.
Isn't it the only use for it? Like have like fake ones that like
The fake ones. Oh yeah, like put like that.
Well, apparently some of us like peanut brittle. I just don't like peanuts. I discovered that this Christmas. I was making peanut butter cookies, and I licked the spoon before I put it in the sink, and I was like, peanut butter is disgusting. And my husband looked at me and he's like, you're 30, and you just figured out you don't like peanut butter. And I was like, yes, I do not like peanut butter. So apparently some of us are just a little slow. But you understand that peanut brittle is hard, right? It crunches when you eat it. But we call it brittle because if we were to drop it, it would shatter into a bunch of pieces. We call it cleaving. Cleave means to cut, right? Like a meat cleaver. So because of the molecular structure, fossils are hard, but they're brittle. So if you dropped it, it's going to shatter, but it's still hard. Does that make sense?
something glass.
Yeah. Except glass is kind of amorphous. But yeah.
So that's why they dig it up so slow.
Yes.
'Cause they just, like,
As opposed to me
dump
with
it
my
around
jackhammer.
and break.
I have time for this. Other things to be doing, like snowshoeing and watching death matches between wasps and centipedes. And like,
Wait, is that actually possible? Say if I decide to just find a wasp, then that sounds.
yeah, I've done it before.
Who won?
Do they
The
actually-
wasp, every time.
Really?
Not that I've done it more than once.
How does it sound like?
I know what you're talking about.
Should we go to class?
What if you did a spider and a wasp?
The spider would like,
Depends what kind of spider.
It depends
Well, if it's a
on the
big
kind of
I'm not
spider.
touching it, I'm shooting it. I'm not vacuuming that. That's gotta go.
No, you know what? Spiders, truthfully, I take the big spiders outside.
I don't.
No.
They don't
I
deserve to be
guess.
out there.
I take the big spiders outside because, you know, where I live, I appreciate the spiders being there to eat all the other stuff.
Wait, how
But
big
I'm
are
the same
spiders?
person who also, like, buys bugs to release on my property, so.
How big are the spiders?
You
that
buy
you-
bugs and then release them on.
That's not bad.
Yeah, like praying mantids.
Oh,
Oh, I had one on my door a couple.
Yeah, you can buy like a little seed, like a little like egg pouch of praying mantises and hang it out in the spring. And then it hatches like hundreds of praying mantids, and then they eat all of the other bad bugs from your garden. It's a great way to prevent things that ruin your tomato seedlings.
Yeah, but then.
Oh, you guys are like, you're such a weirdo. Listen, in my world, I'm normal.
They're like the guardians of your garden.
Yeah. They're so pleasant and happy, and my grandpa used to catch them and give them to me when I was a little kid, so they remind me of my grandpa, so it's like, you know.
They're so cool.
I wanted to make sure I got you guys that information about fossils.